All right, Emma, thank you so much for doing this. You're actually the first person that we're doing the financial audits with, and I know it can be quite nerve-wracking and it's quite courageous. So thank you first and foremost for the trust and everything. Obviously, you've done a lot of pre-work. I wanted to kind of have a little bit of a conversation with you around how you found the pre-work and kind of what you want to get out of this process, really.
Yeah, I thought the pre-work was actually really interesting to think about. It's you don't always think about exactly what you're aiming for, if that makes sense. Like you're kind of thinking like, oh,
Hmm.
I want to be in a good financial position, but what actually does that mean? And it was kind of like, particularly with the timeline exercise, actually being clear like what those goals are, not just being quite general about it. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons I kind of put myself forward for this is because at the moment I feel like a lot of potentially conflicting goals, like trying to do stuff that's good for me now, but also trying to think about the long term, like just trying to think about how I make good choices for now, but also kind of for the future. And so trying to think about what kind of things I could be doing was quite interesting from the pre-course work. And also like looking at the kind of
Good.
gaps that I had, like definitely showed me that I don't understand what my income protection is, even though I have some, and I need to sort that out. Things like that.
Yeah, I've got that actually as an action list to actually talk
Yeah.
through during this process as well. So I've gone through your timeline. I've also gone through your will of life and your finance will as well. And I don't know. I'll ask you first. What are the key things that you want to get out of this audit?
The things I would say, I think trying to get my own head around how to kind of prioritize the kind of funds that I have available at the moment. So as
Hmm.
me and my husband are both about to go part time, our incomes are massively reducing. So we have to be
Hmm.
probably a bit more strategic about what we do with our money. And so I'm currently in the
Hmm.
process of trying to work out actually how I go about prioritizing it. So how much do I put towards retirement? How much do I put towards, investing? And like just trying to get an idea of how to prioritize that. Also kind of I'm definitely a very newbie to anything more than having an ISA. So just kind of trying to start the process of thinking about where kind of places I could put my money to, have good diversification, but also good growth and like those kind of things. Yeah, I think those are kind of the two. That's the kind of the two main ways I'd sum it up.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. That definitely came through in the exercises and the timeline that you completed. And the whole point of doing the exercises is number one, yes, it gets you to think a little bit more holistically outside the normal boundaries of your thought, but it also tries to bring in elements in terms of your real practical life into the equation so that when we start planning and we start saying, well, actually, maybe this is worth doing,
Yeah.
you're tying it to something specifically. And there's a bit of behavioral psychology that sits behind that as well. So, right, I'm just gonna kind of recap the four things that you had on your timeline. So I know one of the first things you put on there was a new house. You're probably looking at that maybe in 2027 potentially. Is that right?
Yeah, we our mortgage for our current house is till 2026.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of in that getting to that point where we could make a decision about whether or not we wanted to stay in this house because there are some things that aren't this house isn't perfect, but then again, so just having the option to maybe move house once that mortgage expires.
Okay, fantastic. We'll talk about that because I do have something to discuss there. Learning to invest, you've already touched on there. You've talked a little bit about, and this relates to investing, the spread of your money, where to allocate it into what pots. And you've also mentioned because you now have a new born baby boy to have some money set aside for him
Yeah.
and then any other children that you might have as well in the future. So essentially, you want to put the building blocks in place right now in order to make sure that you're able to get some money set aside for them for maybe when they're 17 or 18 or so.
Yeah, that kind of having some money either whether they want to go to uni or maybe if the housing market is even a fraction affordable by the time they get to that age, something to be able to help them in the future. Well, currently it's only him, if the potential then.
Now, you don't have any debts apart from obviously the mortgage. So that is a huge relief
Yes.
because you haven't got like personal loans or credit cards or anything like that. being a drain on your income where you have to disperse it to pay that. So to a certain extent, when we get into your budget in a moment, that's the first place we're going to start. We're going to start with financial management. You have quite a bit there, efficiently organized and structured. I think there's maybe just a couple of things to tighten up on to give you the clarity that you want in terms of where to send money
Yeah.
to. And I'll tell you the one thing that you did that I absolutely love, and I've never, ever, ever seen anyone do this. You actually have a budget for your disposable income. Talk me through that and why you do that, because I've not seen that in all the times that I've been doing financial reviews for people.
Is this in terms of the like how much we put to our like day-to-day spending, breaking that down, or is that what you mean?
No, well, in your fact
Yeah.
find document that you sent back, you actually have, a budget for disposable income. So the extra bit, so in there you've
Yes.
got things like, you're overpaying the mortgage, £165.
Yeah.
You've got short-term savings allocated, long-term savings allocated, and then you also got an investment thing as well set aside for that, and that's coming out of your disposable income. How did you get to the point of actually doing that? Because that's really, really good practice.
I think so. What is the way we kind of approach our finances? Of what we've always done as a kind of 10-10-80 model is what me and my husband use. So 10% of our income is always saved. 10% of our income is what we could refer to as tithes and given to charity / our church, and then 80% is what we deem to be like our spending. Although we have also tried to include recently another 5-10% for kind of other investing, etc. And so that is kind of, we try and do those things first and then work with and budget the rest after we've taken those out. So for us, our kind of income always has started at 80% of what we've had rather than the 100%, so that we know we're covering off those two things first.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. And that right there is actually a lesson that we often talk about. It's like paying yourself first, isn't it? It's that whole idea of paying yourself first. So that 20% goes, you've got 80% left, and that is what you're working with essentially. Okay, cool. Perfect. So I know that you and your husband, you're going to be going part-time in June. How much of an impact is that going to have on your income? I know that just doing the numbers, I think it's something like £1,500 a month or something like that. It's going
that sounds
fall
about
by.
right. Yeah, we're both going down from 5 days a week to 3 days a week. So it's theoretically 60% less, but obviously there's a lot of tax benefit in there, so it's not quite quite 40% decrease. So I think it's about that much a month. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess you're going part-time to obviously be able to spend time with your son and
Yeah,
stuff, right?
yeah. It's hopefully mostly they're obviously childcare costs at the moment are so ridiculous, but also wanting to, he's only so young for so long, so we thought, why not? We're going to do it partial, so that'll be 2 days a week ourselves, and then one day our wonderful mum's grandma care for the fifth day a week.
Nice. Okay, cool. So talk me through your budget as it currently sits, because I know that one thing that you did as well that was really, really good, the budget you put in factors in the fact that you're going to see that drop in June. So talk me through that at the moment. And what I'll then do is I'll talk you through why I think there are some improvements or some efficiencies that you can introduce based on what it is that you want to achieve today.
Obviously, some of the things haven't been able to change and have had to stay the same. So the amount, like the base amount of our mortgage has stayed the same. And so we try to take into account our kind of yearly costs, like our car, and that unfortunately is going up rather than going down. And also trying to map out our bills throughout the year and our subscriptions. I think currently we could potentially probably a little bit generous in what we allow ourselves to have subscriptions to, which we could potentially cut back if we needed to. The main hit of what has decreased is the amount of money we overpay our mortgage by per month.
Okay.
That's gone down quite dramatically, because that used to get a lot of our we used to prioritize that quite a lot. So when we were both working full time and didn't have a child to fund, that's where a lot of our money used to go. So we still want to try and keep doing that as much as possible because we know it will pay off in the long run, but we just don't have as
Save you on
much
interest.
to do available
Yeah.
for it.
Yep.
Yeah, and then we have our joint spending, like our kind of day-to-day spending is kind of roughly the same. We're trying to cut back, but obviously that's kind of counteracted by the fact that everything's going up. So even if we're cutting, spending less, it's still we think it's going to cost more.
Yep.
Then we also have a pot each for what we refer to as fund money. So basically, we have a small pot each that each we can spend without having to talk to the other person about. That
Yep.
did get halved now, so that has been decreased since that's the other cut.
So has it changed since you
No,
submitted this,
like
then?
that is what it's now.
That is
Yeah,
with the
that is what
reduction.
it is now.
Good.
But that was more
Good.
before.
Yep.
But that's where some of the cuts have come from.
Yep.
Yeah, and so then currently it's got about, so what's that? Yeah, our kind of extra money to kind of put around is between our mortgage overpayment, investing, and more long-term saving. So that's our kind of like three. The mortgage overpayment currently has a little bit more. Those are the kind of three extra places that the extra kind of cash is going to.
Okay. So is it your intention to keep the mortgage overpayment at 165 a month, or are you likely to
That can
reduce
change.
that?
That's a current approximate figure. Yeah, so it can. That doesn't. Yeah, I'm happy to. That kind of gets flexed about the amount that we think is worthwhile. So I would happily take some of that out and put it more into other forms if we thought that was best. It's just what it is currently.
Okay, that's good to know. I think within your budget, because your income and your expenses ratio is pretty good, because you do, even after you've put that 20% aside, even based on what you're working on, your disposable income number is pretty good. So on the sheets here, disposable income, I think we're looking at about 1,300 roughly. Roughly is what we put down there, and then within that, you've allocated an amount for short term, long term, some investing pots as well, and then overpayments to the mortgage, which still gives you a little bit of fat within there. One of the things that I kind of picked up on when going through this was this whole thing around allocating money to the right places. So do you feel that you don't have a good handle on it right now, or just there are a few things? What would you change? What are the things that immediately come to your head? Like, I would love to be able to change this specific thing.
I think what I would love to be able to change is, I feel like a lot of our money at the moment just goes into a like just bog standard savings account that's getting like, I think it's like 2.5%. And
Mm-hmm.
and so in my head you're like, oh, I'm saving, that's good, but actually I'm like, that is good for the kind of savings for maybe what we want to do in the next 1 or 2 years. So if we needed to buy a new car
Mm-hmm.
or we wanted to go on a nice holiday, that does work. But actually when I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
about prepping ourselves for the long term, 2% interest on that savings account, actually
No,
we're
it's not.
losing
It's not
money.
going to be anywhere near enough.
So
You 100%.
that's the big thing I'd like to change. Is I feel like in principle I'm saving and that is great, but actually I don't think that money is really working for us at the moment.
Yep. Okay, we can circle back to this because the reality is now there are inflation beating accounts out there
Yeah.
right now, and so are perhaps signposts to a couple of options you might be able to look at. I mean, I know that you've got a good amount in joint with your husband in an instant access at that 2.25% that you just referenced there. I know you've got the individual one here at 3.75, so that's a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's working a little bit harder for you, but I think that there were definitely better rates as of recording this video that you can access for sure on the high street. So it's just a question of how do we actually disperse and reallocate those, which we can come to in a moment. So I think, talk to me about your emergency fund, because I think you've got an emergency fund, you've got other savings, bits and pieces there. Looking through it, I was like, okay, you're pretty solid. But I did notice that you kind of put in the fact find document that you felt that you didn't have enough. You've got a little bit of a short from what you think
Yeah.
your emergency fund needs to
I
be.
think that's because I calculated based on three previously 3 months of like the kind of bare minimum essentials. But actually, I decided we kind of reflected that actually we probably couldn't cut all of the things I had kind of not factored in out, particularly so like the
Hmm.
money in the budget for our son and things like that. So actually, I think we decided to make our kind of essential spending cover a few more things, which
Yep.
therefore the calculation kind of increased.
Yep.
So that means that we're a little bit off it, but not too far off.
Okay.
Yeah,
How much did you come to then as your kind of thing? Because I think you're right. Looking at everything that you've got going out, yes, obviously you need to have the bills, food, electric, car, all of that stuff paid for. But in an ideal world, if you're able to cover the essentials and maybe some of the non-essentials that you have in there as well, that would give you, I think, a little bit more peace of
yeah,
mind, particularly if you're going to start allocating money into either an investing account for yourself or for your son. It's really important to have that solid foundation to give you that bedrock. So, yeah, talk me through what you've arrived at in terms of your emergency fund at the moment.
yeah. So we want it to cover, yeah, the base, our mortgage, the bills, our car costs, and our general, like, what we think we need to spend month to month. So it kind of cuts
Hmm.
out the fund money, it cuts out subscriptions, that kind of thing. And we think that
Yep.
comes to, yeah, about three ish grand a month.
Hmm.
So that's how much we think we probably would. Okay, so yeah, we could that would be enough for us to live off of 3 grand a month.
Okay, cool. So that's going to get you to around about nine-ish roughly.
Yeah,
Do you, because I know that you've got other bits and pieces in the background as well, which is good, which is a solid foundation again. I think earmarking that specifically as right your emergency fund, so that's separate. And to be honest, you've kind of already done this. To be honest, because I'm looking at one of the accounts you got here at a joint, you've got that covered.
yeah,
So in terms of efficiency, you could literally just signpost that account. We need to get it into a better interest rate for sure, but you could almost signpost that account as that's your emergency fund.
yeah, yeah,
Does that make
yeah.
sense?
And because I think we've got the one we currently use is our triple access one, which has got the one that's got the best interest rate. And our assumption is
Hmm.
that if we obviously did have some form of emergency, we would take all the money out, and therefore it doesn't matter that it's triple
Yep.
access. Um,
Yep.
and that's actually only about a grand off what we wanted it to be, so we could just
Want it
top
to
that
be.
up.
Yep.
Is potentially our plan. Um,
So talk me through the triple access thing on here.
mhm.
What does that mean with that? I used to work for that provider, but they didn't have a triple access account when I was there. So talk me through
It
that.
basically is you get 4.25% interest if you
Hmm.
take money out of it up to 3 times a year.
Three
So
times.
if you do it
Okay,
more,
cool.
then it goes down to like 1%.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I think even just looking at the rates, because I was looking at some yesterday
Yeah.
for a post, you can get instant access accounts that will give you more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Not with the same provider though. So I think there is a big question of whether you're wedded
Yeah.
to that provider specifically, because sometimes it's the hassle of opening a new one, transferring money over to a new account, then obviously you get the new card and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff to
Yeah.
go with it. But if you're not wedded to it, there are some other accounts that will give you more than that 4.25% on instant access. So you haven't got to worry
Okay.
about,
Yeah.
if we access it more than three times, we're going to see a bit of a rate drop.
Yeah. That would make sense. Because yeah, you
Yeah.
do obviously want, in a way, your emergency fund to be accessible as much as you need it to be.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the whole point. It's an emergency fund. So you really kind of need it to be accessible
Yeah.
at any moment's notice, really. So you can get to it really, really quickly. And just having like a rate drop potentially, if you need to access it more than the three times, because things do happen, that sometimes that can be a disincentive sometimes. So, but again, we could have a look at that as a something to circle back to on here. I mean, I put down here, I mean, and again on emergency funds, there is no particular science around you should have this
Yeah.
much. I mean, mathematically, they always say either 3, 6, 9, or 12,
Yeah.
right? And like, so for example, I work with clients who'll be like, I want 12 months or 18 months because they just want that length of time. For other people, it's like, actually, 3 months is good enough for me. I like 6 months. but it is very much you fit it to what you need it to do for you. So as long as you're happy with that and you've already kind of got the sum
Yeah.
there, that's perfect. You can park that. So if, and again, you can continue to add into it. It really depends on how you allocate those two accounts over, but rates definitely will be able to do. But I think from an emergency fund point of view, you're absolutely solid on there. And I think you should have a little bit of confidence in the fact that, yes, you've got a really nice kind of like base to build on from that point onwards as well. Okay. The other thing that I was going to talk about, so the one thing that I do have is I do have a suggestion for you around the budgeting side of
Hmm.
things. So you kind of already do this in the 10-10-80,
Yeah.
but I want to kind of introduce a different way of thinking slightly to maybe bolt onto this idea. And what this would do is hopefully give you a bit of clarity around this allocation of cash.
Yeah.
Okay. So bear with me for a second whilst I just run you through this. So I normally do in my book, I talk about 3 pots. So similar, right? Essentials, non essentials, then the other pot, which is the third pot. So that's where you're going to be doing the investment planning from,
Yeah.
account for your son, that pot right there, right? So my calculation says that when you look at your essential bills, and I've portioned them off slightly different to the way you put them down on the fact find. When you look at your essentials and your non-essentials, altogether they come to about 4.3 a month,
Yeah.
which gives you, according to my numbers and what you put in here, about 845 left over as disposable per month that you can use. And bearing in mind, that allows you all the subscriptions that you have, the tithing that you have, the luxuries, all this stuff that you enjoy. So nothing
Yeah.
changes, right? You keep it exactly the way it is. But that 845, what I think would be worthwhile doing, just in terms of like a psychological kind of keep it really tidy and compartmentalized, is for you to think of that 845 or that amount or whatever proportion of that amount as right. That goes into a third other account, right? Other pot, if you will. And it's from this money that we can start to talk about, right? So, from an investing point of view, how much?
Yeah.
From a point of view for your son, how much? And also, because also within what you've spoken about here, you've got long term and short term allocations. So, my question for you, I guess, is on the short term allocation, the short term investing thing that you've got here, because again, you put down a budget for it. What do you think that will be used for? What's your intention with that amount? You're thinking around that short term piece.
The intention for the short term, what we deem kind of short term, is things kind of that we would expect to be spent in maybe two, 3-ish years. So things like if we were going to go on a like that's the pot that funds our holidays. That's the pot that
Hmm.
funds any work we have to do to our
Good.
house, our new
Good.
car.
Yeah.
Um, those are the kind of the three main things, and then any kind of like extra expenses, any kind of like you know treats that go outside of the budget. That's the pot that funds it.
Fantastic.
Um,
Great.
but
Good.
I'm not
Okay.
sure if it's got the right level of fund versus the priority that it is. Because at the moment, just quite basically, a lot of
Ah.
our money just goes instantly goes into there when it probably doesn't need as much as it's got currently.
Okay. So this is a really interesting and important question. Then, how much of a priority is the short term pot versus the long term pot? If you could score them 1 out of 10, how would you score them?
I think my kind of logical brain is would say that the long term is far more important.
Okay.
And I'm very much I like to plan for the future, and I'd rather be prepped for the future. But also, then my kind of less logical brain is that actually having money to do things like with my son is actually also important. Like being able to take him places on holiday is actually a worthwhile spending of money. And I don't want too much for, like, it's the balance of trying to be sensible versus being excessively frugal for the sake of saving.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is the fine line, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So give me a score on both of them.
I would say maybe like an 8 for long term, and then like a 6 or a 7 for the short term. Say, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Give me 6 or 7 for short term.
Let's say 7.
7. Okay. The reason why I asked you to commit that to that is just to see what the difference is.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like they're both equally as important as each other.
Yeah.
But like you've already said there, it is going to be about the balance. And it's all about the balance of what you can do now, because it's fantastic that you're planning for the future, and everyone should 100%. But at the same time, it's trying to make sure that you've got a really good sense of, okay, I want to do this, because at the end of the day, money's supposed to be a tool to help you do the things you want to do now and in the future. And if you forsake one in need of the
Yeah.
other, it can feel like you're not really enjoying the present. You've got so much going on for the future. It just puts you out of kilter,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah,
So the
exactly.
balance there is going to be really, really important. Okay, cool. So that's good to know. I'm going to ask you to commit to numbers in a minute as well. So on your disposable budget, I think on short term you put 450.
Yeah.
On long term you put 100.
Yeah.
Would that amount change based on
I think,
the numbers you just gave?
I think when I'm thinking my like long-term saving, I kind of include, there are kind of like 3 numbers in my budget which I think all kind of count in my head. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be
Yep.
the long-term saving, the investing, and the
Yep.
mortgage overpayment.
Yep.
So that kind of
Yep.
brings them closer
Together.
together.
Yes. Yep.
Um,
Perfect.
so, and interesting when I say like the long term savings of like 100, that is I feel like it's the most vague number in the budget, because currently I'm really trying to work out what actually to do with it.
Uh-huh.
Because it's kind of like a new factor that we're bringing into our budget. So I'm still trying to work out where that 100 is going to go.
Okay, good.
Mainly because we're not going to currently on maternity pay. This budget
Yeah.
is more for once I actually go back to work, once I'm being properly paid
Okay.
again.
Okay.
So yeah, currently my budget does tip slightly more the other way, and the short term is actually getting more money than the long term is.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm going to look at them in terms of,
Which, by the way, there is no correct answer
yeah,
to this. The answer is what you want to do. But the reason why, because when I looked at it, and I was looking through the fact find, I was like, okay, long term investing, and for me, they are both the same thing.
yeah,
But you've itemized them separately, which is why I've asked which is more important, long term or the short term,
yeah,
because at the end of the day, you need to find the balance and what you feel is going to be right for you.
yeah,
Now, you could tip it on its head and actually go, you know what? Long term needs to be 450 and short term needs to be, I don't know, 350, whatever mix you want. Whatever you come to is the right answer for you. And the choice that you make is obviously reviewable. So on 1 month, it might be, well, actually, I'm going to put a little bit more in the short term bucket because actually I want to do this in 2-3 months' time. So that might mean that a little less comes out of the long term or goes into the long term bucket, right?
yeah,
You can flex and you can switch with this, and that's completely fine to do so. But the whole point of this exercise is to get a high level bird's eye view of, right, there's this money going in here, I want it to go here, but you have the license to tweak and change as you go along. It doesn't have to be set in stone. But having a clear idea of what it is that you're aiming for will give you all the clarity that you need, and you'll feel more confident and more kind of like aware of, okay, I know that I'm doing this. So in terms of the allocation of money into the different things, you know you've got them locked down.
yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah, it does. And I think something that me and my husband have always kind of talked about is thinking about with our short-term savings is kind of almost having like having kind of a cap on the amount that we think we need. And so actually, once we kind of feel like we've got that covered, any extra could then go into the more long term. So then we kind of have this amount that's like, okay, that's enough that for the next few years we can go on the holidays we want to go on.
Yep.
And then, so, sometimes that might dip down when we do pay for a holiday. And then if it gets back up, then kind of putting it more into the long term. Because sometimes I think you can collect it and, not wanting to hoard. That's the thing I always try not to do.
Yep.
And not just sit on money.
Yep. Yep. You're spot on. Because when I look at it, you've got an account which covers your emergency fund. You've also then got two other accounts, which, to be fair, is your short-term savings.
Yeah.
And it's funded quite healthily.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, okay, so do you really need to throw more money into that pot, bearing in mind you have what you have?
Yeah.
And this is where understanding, right, okay, if you look at it holistically, I've got this amount in the emergency fund, that's parked, that's done. That gives me the peace of mind. I've got my short-term fund here. The question is that number big enough? If it is, yes, perfect. Okay, so if you want to continue, you've got disposable income. Do you put all of it into, that long-term plan, or do you divert it into mortgage repayments? You've got full license here. And when I was reading through this and going through it, I was like, actually, you're already doing everything that you need to do. You've already allocated the money, but I don't necessarily think that you see it the way I see it from the outside. Because I'm like, okay, this is a relatively small tweak.
Yeah.
Just literally assign that because this is already taken care of, and be clear on right what needs to go where, what amount needs to go where. And one thing I will ask you to do, which is worthwhile just exploring, and you've mentioned it already, what is the cap on your short term? You need to come up with a number, a specific number.
Yeah.
And the idea behind this is because you know that number is there, you're going to get that peace of mind of knowing, okay, look, from a short-term point of view, I know that if we want to go on a holiday, we want to do this, that's completely fine. Now, that means that additional money can flow into your long-term plan. But in the meantime, if you do book a holiday and you do deplete that pot, the other thing you need to ask yourself is, okay, so what level are you okay with it depleting to before you start to build it back up again? Which means that money from in the long-term pot may need to come back out
Yeah.
into the short term, or you split the resources accordingly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And it's kind of how we've always thought about the emergency fund, in the fact that if that ever got depleted, the kind of short-term savings would be
Fills it up.
reprioritized to that.
Yeah.
And I guess it's kind of
Yeah.
adding another layer of trickle down with the long
Yeah.
term.
100%. So the way to look at it is this, and this is why I talk about the 3 buckets in my book. Your essentials are done.
Yeah.
Your non-essentials are also done. You've got the other pot.
Yeah.
Now, in that other pot, for you've got your emergency fund in there, you've got your short-term savings in there, and you've also got your long-term plan as well that is being funded from that pot.
Yeah.
So as long as you've got enough money going into the top of that other pot, you can disperse it across those 3 accounts in whatever way you choose.
Yeah.
But knowing that actually, if you use the emergency fund, the short-term savings account will top it up, and therefore you need to then top up the short-term savings account for maybe your long-term plan, or splitting the resources to make sure that you stay at a level where you feel financially comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Hey, Pete here. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching this episode of Financial Audits. I hope that you're getting something from this conversation. If you would like to participate in a future episode of Financial Audits, then please email the address down below and put in the subject line Financial Audits. Now, if you have watched this far and you have picked up a couple of things that will help you, then by all means consider subscribing, but definitely smash that like button because it really, really helps with the YouTube algorithm. And a lot of work has gone into this episode with recording, organizing, and editing. Thank you so much. I know that you've got a stocks and shares ISA, right?
Yes.
You do. Is that the
I
only
actually
investment that you
think
have?
I have
currently?
2, which I don't know if you're meant to have 2.
As long as you've not contributed to more than one in a tax
No.
yet, but those rules are changing.
I basically changed provider that I wanted to be investing in, and so I haven't touched the first one. I only invest in one of them currently. The other one's just kind of sitting and hopefully growing.
Yeah. Okay. So there are 2 there, and one of them is with one of the big providers. I haven't heard of the other one. I have kind of briefly. So one of them you're paying money into already, right?
Yes, the one that's currently
Okay,
smaller
cool.
is the one that's getting
That's
money
currently what's
currently.
that's smaller. Okay, cool. Um, are you happy with where it is? I guess is the main question, because when you think about investing, you can get lost in the woods,
Yeah,
and I'm a firm believer in trying to keep it as simple as possible. And the reason for that is, you've got to try and balance this with the fact that you're working part time, you just had a son. So do you really want to be trawling through investments every 3 or 6 months and
yeah,
trying to figure out what you should be doing with it? Probably not. So where you've got it right now, you're in a robo investing kind of like setup.
yeah,
You send the money, they manage
yeah,
it, but they're charging a fee for that. Now,
yes,
most people will tell you, well, you need to keep the fees as low as possible, which is true. But if you kind of know what you're doing, I mean, you can look at other low cost providers, but you still need to go and pick it yourself. And if you don't know what you're picking, that can then lead to a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of unease around what you're actually doing. So I think you need to tailor these things to match what's going on in life generally,
yeah,
and not adding things on that might cause stress or anxiety just because the markets might go up or go up, might go up or go down. So I think maybe, I don't know. How do you feel about where it is? Do you want more control? I guess is the question.
I think what I don't think I necessarily want more control. I think what I think might be good would be to have more, maybe more diversity. I don't like
Okay.
just so, if one is performing not as good, then there is another, like, you know what I mean? I do think the point about the fact that if I'd love to be able to actually kind of do the invest, like more research and invest in particular stocks, etc. But like, yeah, I have a 3-month-old baby. Like, I can barely, keep up with doing the dishwasher
Yeah.
right now, let alone
Yeah. Yeah.
do investing in and into research for investing. So
Yeah.
at this phase of life, probably having one that is more managed for me is probably a much more realistic way for me to be investing right now. Um, the one I'm investing in at the moment, I am a fan of because it is about ethical investing and it is about trying to invest
Okay.
in
Good.
things that are,
Good.
good for the environment, good for the planet, and that is something
Yep.
I do care about, which is why I shifted. But I know that I do probably, unfortunately, harm the return that I get from that. But maybe in the long term, if there's a big
Mm,
shift towards all of like renewable energy, maybe my shares will go, my stocks and shares will go
yeah.
through the roof.
I mean, that's not necessarily true anymore.
Yeah,
It used to be the case where they would say that, if you're invested ethically, the performance would be superior, inferior to other kinds of accounts. But if you look at it over the past 3, 4 years, that's not actually been the case. Some of these ethical investment funds are doing very, very well.
yeah,
And a lot of them driven by, the tech sector, for example, EVs, for example, huge boost in that arena. And I think because you've got a vision for how you want to invest and that's important to you, it's important that you key into that as well,
yeah,
for sure. Because if you try and pick your own ethical investments, trust me, I used to sit in investment committee meetings when they used to go through whether it's greenwashed or not. You don't want time. You don't have
yeah.
the time for that. So
It's
you
very
I
detailed
think you're in a
progress.
good place with where it is. But I think there is a question of, do you combine the two
Yeah,
into one?
yeah,
That's potentially an option for you to do so you can streamline it. And that way you can get your larger pot into the place where you're kind of, passionate about the way it's actually invested as well. I think you need to do some comparison, just make sure that obviously you look at the fees that are involved with that. That's going to be really important. And just make sure that you're doing your due diligence in terms of, right, okay, what's the difference between the two before you actually make the move and jump. But it's very much your choice to do, but you could consolidate the two potentially if you want to keep things really, really simple. I'm interested to know what you meant by to have it more diversified.
um I think, and this is so a couple of reasons, and this plays into why I haven't consolidated them into one yet. And one part of the not consolidating it is because I I worry that if I've not had that stocks and shares ISA for like, how long have I had it? I want to say 3 years, maybe the
Okay.
older one. So I'm not sure if it's currently had enough of a return that actually I've kind of almost like lost money on it, if that makes sense, compared to like a savings account. Um, but then I think my concern, I don't want to, maybe I'm slightly throwing him under the bus here. My husband has more of a concern about this over than I do. But obviously, it's our money and I'm doing this for both of us. So I do care about what
Yeah,
he
yeah.
thinks. Is that having all of our money in one place, in one stocks and shares ISA, in one fund, if that fund tanks, that's all of our savings. Like, well, it's not, it's a lot of our savings gone. And so that's why I have this idea of diversification in my mind, in the fact that I want to do things where my money is growing, but you know, I saw what happened, like my dad, when my dad was made redundant during the 2008 crash, and he really, my dad really struggled at that time and lost quite a bit of money that he
Yeah.
had invested. And I've kind of seen that, and therefore I don't want to put myself in the position that there
You
is
want to
another
avoid it.
crash, that I've really harmed
Yeah.
myself financially. um
Yeah.
but also want to have growth. So it's that kind of, again,
Yeah.
balance, the question of
Yeah.
balance.
And it's completely normal to feel like that.
Yeah,
100%. In fact, that's probably the big challenge of investing. The one thing that we're all trying to get right that can be so difficult sometimes.
yeah,
And unfortunately, across social media, when things are going great guns, everyone talks about how it's going great. Everyone's making money. But nobody talks about when actually the fund's down
yeah,
and actually it's a bit of a negative. Everyone keeps that really, really silent. And so I think there are a couple of things. There are things that you can control, things that you can't control. I think when you think about diversification, one of the main things that people often speak about or think about when they talk about in diversification is how it's invested within the fund that you're invested in. Now, looking at who it's with, the larger part, who it's with, they are a big, reputable company. And I've done some work with them in the past when I was advising and through my years in Canary Wharf. They will have a global fund. So, for sure, this will be invested in the US, in Europe, maybe a little bit in the UK, in emerging markets. It will be invested across the entire global map
yeah,
effectively. So I think you're going to have good diversification because you've got that global view there. What I think is important to kind of acknowledge is even if you move it to the other provider right now, you're probably going to something that will still be globally invested,
yeah,
maybe more ethically, but you still potentially run the same risk of it will go up and it will go down.
yeah, yeah,
That you can't change. And so I think one of the main things that is worthwhile bearing in mind, which is why we spent a little bit of time on the emergency fund side of things, is that ultimately you have a decent emergency fund in place to allow you to invest this for the longer term without needing to be too concerned about if it drops significantly, you need the money
yeah,
because investing is a long
yeah,
term kind of like view. So it will go up and down. It's guaranteed it will. There is, you just can't get around it. But the point is, if it goes down, does it impact you being able to pay the bills, feed your son, go on holiday, and do all the things that you want to be able to do? That's what you try and insulate against. And from everything we've spoken about and everything that I've seen, it won't impact you at all. So I think you have a little bit of license to not to worry about that pot specifically. But I think, yes, getting into a place where you feel comfortable with how it's invested for sure is something of a priority, I guess, for you.
yeah. And I think that does make sense, in the fact that realistically, this kind of money is, when I think about what is it for, it's for, yeah, when my son grows up, it's for when me and my husband want to retire, and actually that is a long time away. We're looking at 20 years till I want to use this money, and so actually that has got the time for it to hope, if it had a big dip, to hopefully
Go up
recover
and down,
again.
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So yeah,
I was going to say, don't forget as well, you're both employed, you and your husband. So you have an investment sat in the background as well, which is your pension.
yeah,
So your workplace pension is an investment in the background working away for you. So under the auto enrollment rules, the rules are you have to pay in 5% of your salary. The employee that you work with has to pay in 3. So between you and your husband, you're getting 8% each of your annual salary going into a pension.
Yeah.
So one thing that might be worthwhile looking at, because we're talking this long-term piece now, is, and if you haven't done this, and most people don't, go and check with your employer who is managing the pension, and then go and find out whether you're in a default fund or not. If you haven't moved, if you didn't specifically say that you wanted it in a particular fund, it is likely you've got it in a default fund.
Okay.
And if you do, there is an argument to say, because you're both relatively young, you've got 40 odd years to retirement, there is an argument to say that it might be worthwhile putting that into something that will make your money work a little bit harder
Yeah.
for you. Because people often don't realize that it just goes into a box standard default fund, which isn't necessarily right in every instance.
Yeah, that's true. I suppose, like, my husband's got quite a generous matching scheme with how much
Oh, fantastic.
his employer will match. So I think I need to double check we're making the most of that. I don't have much say over my
He needs to
pension.
snap their hand off. I'm telling you, he needs to snap their hand off for that.
Okay. Yeah.
If whatever they will go up to,
Yeah.
so some of the matching schemes will say, if you go here, we'll go here.
Yeah.
Some people will say, actually, if you go here, we'll go here.
Yeah.
Whatever he needs to get that extra cash from the company,
Yeah.
he needs to do that. Has he been with them for a long time?
5 years.
Okay, yeah. He definitely needs to take advantage of that.
Okay. Yeah.
And obviously factor that into your budget. But when you look at the numbers, it may not be too much of a hit in terms of your take home pay.
Yeah.
But he definitely needs to snap their hand off for that for sure.
Yeah. My pension is fixed how much I can put into it, but I do win. It's all right because it's currently still a defined benefit pension, so that is I'm very lucky with
what?
that.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh my god.
So I'm very lucky.
That is so rare.
I know.
That is very, very rare.
So I'm very, very grateful for that. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really, really good.
Makes me not want to move jobs. That's for sure.
For sure. On the investing piece, let's talk about your son then.
Yeah.
And doing some stuff for the future for your kid. Have you looked at things like junior ISAs yet?
Yes, I have, and we're thinking of setting him up one for money that like anyone gives, like his grandparents give him, for example, rather than the money like, because I feel, yeah, we would like to have some money to support him when he is older, but that's kind of money that we would like to kind of almost choose how we spend it at the time. So like if we need it to help him at uni, etc. But we're thinking a junior ISA would probably be better for the money that like people kind of give to us to steward for him, basically, because it's not for us to choose how to spend it; it's for him to choose how to spend it.
Yeah.
The thing I was put off with a junior ISA is the fact that you can't take it out. And that means, which I understand the whole point is it's meant to be for once they turn 18, but it means that you're locked into the provider. And so if like a provider who's competitive now won't necessarily always be like that competitive, if that makes sense, but that money is stuck in there. So you kind of can't do that swapping around to try and get the best interest rates with the money. But it is tax free, so that does seem and it will go straight to him. So that's what I think we will do.
I think a couple of things on that. It depends what form of junior ISA you want to do. You can do cash junior ISAs. You can do a stocks and shares junior ISA, so it's actually invested for him.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's investment risks there, but compound interest. He's 3 months old now. If he gets compound interest for 18 years with positive returns on average, you could be putting small amounts of money in that could end up being quite a sizable amount for him when he turns 18.
Yeah.
But that presents, I guess, two problems in my experience. Number one, he owns it at 18. So really, really important that you kind of get ahead of, having a chat with him and saying, listen, everyone's contributing to this thing for you, want you to use it responsibly. Don't, obviously if you want to go traveling and, have some fun with your friends, that's fine, but within reason.
Yeah.
That's often a worry for a lot of parents. So you need to have that conversation of money early and be mindful of that. But one of the best things that I've seen people do in terms of good practice for that is, things like birthdays. ask people to put in 20 quid, 25 quid, whatever it is that they can afford, because anyone can contribute into it. And it just means that that pot of money will just be working in the background there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Instead of getting more
And
stuff
and
which she
on
already
that,
doesn't need.
yeah. And on that, it's also then just, within your budget, again, commit to a number. So what does that number look like? It doesn't have to be large. It doesn't have to be, whatever is comfortable with you. If it's £50, commit to that, have that going in. Because I think once you kind of get into that routine of, that that's done, where one of your goals is to make sure that you're aware of where things are allocated, you're ticking those boxes quite nicely by doing that.
Yeah, and last thing I've been pondering about a lot is how much of our saving rather I would want to put into like a junior ISA for him, and it kind of does come down to the question of um him basically him having access to it when he's 18. And like, it sounds like awful, like I'm already not trusting my child, but like in terms of actually, is it better to be like just in a lump sum of cash for him as soon as he turns 18, or is it better to be somewhere where we can use it like to pick and choose what we need for to use it for at the time?
Yeah,
um
good question. I mean,
yeah,
there isn't a right or wrong answer to that. I
yeah,
mean, I think you just need to think and work it through to say, okay, if you do a lump sum for him when he's 18, the one thing that he's going to miss out on is if you did it in a stocks and shares junior ISA, he's going to miss out on all of the compound growth potentially.
yeah,
So put it this way: if you put, let's say, £1,000 into it today, and it compounded over 18 years, is going to be worth potentially more in 18 years' time than if you gave him £2,000 or £3,000 potentially at age 18. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah,
So I think it's just trying to kind of come to terms and kind of get an understanding of what that might look like
yes,
from
that's
your
true.
point of view.
Yeah,
Because again, there is no right or wrong answer. It's the answer that best works for you,
yeah,
um, and what you want to do.
yeah, that's very true. um but I think it's definitely something the I didn't think about doing a junior ISA in a stocks and shares form, because that's probably actually quite a good way of not falling into that fixed interest rate trap, because it will still grow and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, there is risk with it,
Yeah,
but if you think about um, giving it the best potential to be a sizable amount, junior stocks and shares ISA is probably going to give you the best potential for it to be a sizable amount where, it might be a deposit for a house depending on how much basically goes in.
yeah,
And those are the key things that I think make a huge difference in the wider picture when you really start to look at things.
yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So, any questions on that or any other thoughts on that?
No, I don't think so. I think that.
Okay. I think the only other thing that's worthwhile just talking about is just plans on the new house in potentially 2027. I know that obviously you're. Do you know when you're going to go back full time? Because I know one of your concerns was whether you'll have enough equity built up and then obviously
Yeah,
borrowing power.
so it's obviously a very who knows situation. I mean, right now in the midst
Hmm.
of like still having a very newborn baby, he's probably an only child, but like it's like probably not for a while is the answer about going back full time. And I
Okay.
think because realistically, we're probably going to have this setup of part-time work, part-time childcare until our children, however many that'll be, probably no more than two, but one or two are in school.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which, so that realistically is, if we had another one in a couple of years' time, that's maybe 7 years.
Hmm.
Um, and we we're in a like our house is lovely and our house is very much good enough. So anything, any kind of want to move is just a want, it's not a need. Although maybe our house
Hmm.
might feel quite small if we had a second child.
Yep.
But so yeah, we'll end up probably in a very similar situation financially if into when our mortgage is up to when we bought the house from going part
Hmm.
time. So basically, we won't have that increased earning potential as to like get a bigger mortgage. So because we've kind of been aware of that, that's why we're trying to overpay our mortgage as much as possible and trying to kind of get more of the equity in the house. But realistically, I'm unsure whether when it comes to the end of our mortgage, if we'll actually be able to afford to move, or if we could afford to move, it's something actually worthwhile to move, because obviously the costs of moving are quite a lot, apart
Yeah,
from
sure.
the house.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. If you were to move in today's market, what would you move to, and what would be the price point on that house?
It's a very good question. It would depend on whether or not we decided to stay where we are in terms of where we live. So we currently live commutable to London. So obviously that means that our house. So when we bought this house, it was what, 415. So realistically, anything bigger than that in today's market would probably, like, if I could like pick the house I wanted now in today's market, that would probably be 500, 600.
Okay.
But obviously there's the factor of actually we could move further out, we could make our commutes worse, we could sacrifice on other things.
Yeah, sure. Okay, but you've already got quite a bit of equity in the property, haven't you?
I think so.
Have you had it valued recently?
Pardon?
Have you had it valued?
No, we've not had our house valued.
Okay.
I think last time I
You've
looked
got a lot of
on
equity.
Rightmove, it was like 450, 460, I think, is what they said it was.
Okay.
But that's just
So
Rightmove,
you've
so I could be very, very unrealistic.
yeah, but you've got quite a lot of equity, and I think you'll be okay because you're overpaying, so
Yeah,
you're reducing how much you owe, gaining more equity, so you're building up that equity anyway. The property has gone up in value since you bought it. Looking at how much you have outstanding on the mortgage right now, I mean, let's just take 450. You're going to be fine,
okay,
I think. So you've got, about £146,000 in equity
yeah,
in the property, assuming your earnings remain exactly the same,
yeah,
between you, 85 roughly a year,
yeah,
you'll be fine.
okay,
You'll be absolutely fine. I don't think that there'll be any issues at all there. I think it's worthwhile probably just thinking about, do you, and this is the trouble. It can be a bit difficult because you don't know what's happening around the corner,
yeah,
what happens to property prices. But if you're in commuter distance to London, those areas generally hold their value quite well
yeah,
because of the commuter distance into London. So to a certain degree, you may be a little bit insulated from shocks in the property market potentially, but you've got a lot of equity in the property already. So if you need to take that jump and you continue to buy more equity through overpayments, I think you'll be fine. At least based on what we're seeing now, I would probably just suggest keep an eye on it
yeah,
and come up with a plan. So again, when we talk about that budgeting and in that other part, yes, you've got your short term, your long term, and then you've got your emergency fund. Start to really think about, okay, look, so if we do get to the point where actually we do want to move, what do you need to put in place? So out of your disposable income, how much of it goes? So it might be, again, you split what goes into the long term and put more into the mortgage. You might do that, but just keep an eye on it. But I think you'll be completely fine in terms of how much you'll be able to borrow, because as long as your incomes don't drop below what they already are, you're building up good equity in the property.
I think one of the other big concerns I have about potentially, obviously, wanting to move is currently the interest rate. So we got a fairly decent
You've got a
interest
good
rate.
one, by the way. I
Yeah.
looked at it, I was like, wow, you've got a good one.
But we got that before, you know, everything went a bit weird and mental with interest rates. So I guess I've looked at how much, if we got the same mortgage now, we're looking easy at
How much
another
the,
£500 a month.
yeah,
And so I think that's the other fear I have, is that we get to 2026 when my mortgage, like the rate we have at the moment, runs out, and then because we thankfully did a 5-year fix when we did it. Very grateful to our mortgage advisor, because we were like, oh, let's just do 2, and he was like, nah, I'd do 5, and we're like, thank you so much for that advice.
yeah.
He saved us a lot of money. But yeah, I have concerns about what our mortgage would look like in 2026 when, but
Okay.
maybe the rates will have come down a little bit, or we just have to
Yeah.
find another £500.
I mean, to be honest with you, will the rate come down to the 2% that
Probably
you're in?
not.
Probably not.
Yeah,
I think rates will probably level out at maybe four
yeah,
ish, roughly. Um, but the gift that you have is you can pre-plan this now.
yeah,
So you've got a couple of years. So again, in that other pot where you've got your short terms, your long term, your emergency fund, it may just be a case of trying to anticipate and say, okay, look, based on today's rates, we might need an extra £500 per month. So how do you build up a cushion to kind of give you the ability to be able to call on that money in a pot potentially if everything remains the same as they currently are right now?
yeah,
And I think just being proactive and pre-thinking ahead will really really help.
yeah. I think yeah, that makes sense.
Right, your life insurance and your income protection.
Yeah,
Okay, so you got it with a you took it out with a mortgage, obviously, right?
yeah, yeah. We took it
Okay.
out. We took both out with via our mortgage advisor when we got the mortgage.
Do they
Um,
do it as a joint or two individual single policies?
our life insurance is joint,
Hmm.
and I believe the income protections are two individual policies.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
Um,
100%.
yeah. Well, I mean, I
Okay.
have two different booklets for them here. I was trying to.
They will be separate
Yeah,
because normally you're covering an individual,
yeah.
so you won't be able to have income protections as a joint policy. So your life cover includes critical illness, yeah?
I am pretty sure it does. Yes.
Pretty sure it would do because normally it's more cost effective to get them both together
Yeah.
than separately. Okay.
Um,
So how the critical illness works, the life and critical illness works is if you either die or you get diagnosed with any number of medical conditions that can be classed as a critical illness, the insurance policy will pay out. So I think you stated it will pay out a sum to pay off the mortgage. So you'll be mortgage free, happy days, done.
yeah.
Um, the income protection is designed to basically pay out a proportion, a percentage of your monthly income. So it's normally 70, maybe 80%, roughly between that region every single month. And you can either have it so it pays out for a particular period of time. So it might be a year, it might be two, it might be three. Um, some of them you can get to pay out all the way to retirement. So if anything drastic were to happen, you weren't able to work, it would just continue to pay out to retirement. And some of them will be inflation linked as well. So you'll see the rise in the payments you receive according to inflation. Um, it would be interesting to know, and again, go look at this in your policy document. Is it a lot of them will have like periods where you can't claim? So it might be 3 months, 6 months.
Yeah.
Try and get an idea of what that detail is. So it means that if for whatever reason you couldn't work for the first 3 months or 6 months, you can't claim,
Yeah.
and then it kicks in. But you want to check how long that period is for. Then you also want to check how long will it pay you for? Is it a year? Is it two? Is it three? Is it indefinitely? Is it all the way to retirement? Those are things that are worthwhile just checking
Okay.
and just reviewing. And more than happy for you to ping me a message once you've had a look at it. I trust that your mortgage advisor would have done a really good job because it's regulated and he would have had to do compliance and all this
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff. It's all great fun doing all the paperwork for it. So I'm sure that he's done everything. But because you weren't too sure how it basically works, those are maybe some of the nuances that are worthwhile just kind of understanding. Um,
Yeah.
on some policies, go on.
I think I've got well, this is my husband's here. So I think, yeah, from my understanding, there is some he's got a waiting period of 3 months.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Um and then with a monthly benefit of 1,750 and a finishing age of 52.
Okay, that's good.
Um
That's good.
so my thought trying to remember my assumption is we took that out so it would cover the length of the length of the mortgage.
The mortgage. Yeah, yeah.
Um
No, that's good.
yeah, end date
That's
apparently
good.
is the 9th of March 2049.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
um
good. That's perfect. Yeah.
but my only wondering is if I have to, because with the whole I remember it being about percentage base, of
Hmm.
your income, and it can only be up to a certain percent. They can only give you a certain
Hmm.
percent of your income, can't they? And so
Yeah.
if we are having our incomes reduce, I guess, do we need to update that with them?
I would I would reach out to the mortgage advisor again and just say,
Yeah.
look, change of circumstances. Is there anything that needs to be done?
Okay. Yeah.
And it may mean that he maybe needs to have a look at it again for you.
Okay. Yeah.
I haven't done one for a while, so I can't remember. It's
No.
been
Yeah.
years since I
That's
wrote a policy, so I can't remember off the top of my head immediately. But it's worthwhile just checking with him because the one thing you want to be is you want to be safe
yeah. Yeah.
because God forbid you ever needed to use it and they'd be like, well, you dropped your you
yeah.
dropped your hours and therefore we're now paying you more because it was based on this, and they said we're not going to pay. So it's better to be safe than sorry. So it's worth asking the question just to be sure.
Yeah. Um. I'll definitely do that. Just writing that down to remember. Yeah. Um. But yeah, it's definitely good to
Honestly, Emma,
know that it's,
most people don't have income protection, so the fact that you do is solid. It really, really is. Um, yeah. So I was so pleased when I saw that on your sheet.
it's. I have to admit, it does feel expensive per month. So what between like the life and the two income protections is something like 40 quid a month, something like that, I think, between the three policies.
That's not bad.
I know, but it just feels like a lot. But then when
I
you
know.
say
I
it's
know.
40 quid a month, and actually, I guess you just never want to think that we're going to be in a situation when one of us dies or one of us gets really ill.
Yeah.
And then actually 40 quid a month is going to seem really, really cheap. But
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
now, 40 quid a month seems like a lot of money.
Yeah. The one thing that is what, and it's framing how you think about this. It's it's better to have it and not need it
Yeah.
than need it and not have it. So if you think about it though, for £40 a month, which is going to cover your mortgage, is going to cover your income as well for such a long time.
Yeah.
So for the £40, potentially it's going to pay out hundreds of thousands of pounds to pay off a mortgage.
Yeah.
It will also fund you for 30 odd years for your income, which will probably be inflation linked as well. So when you think about that exchange of value for the £40 a month, if you needed it,
Yeah.
it would be 100% worth it. But the hope with all insurance, and this is the horrible bit, you hope you never need
Yeah.
it. Because if you need it, it's like, okay, something hasn't gone according to plan. I'll send you a lot of notes after this anyway, with some thoughts and everything. But yeah, hopefully you found this useful.
Yeah, really,
and
really helpful.
thought-provoking
Thank
as
you
well.
very much for your time. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you.